At some point I discovered electronic music and I was fascinated.
Mm-hmm.
And I started making electronic music, but I considered it as a hobby. And then I moved to Berlin in the early 1990s, and that changed everything because suddenly there was all the other people who had similar interests and there was exchange. And so I step by step moved into this whole business. It was all very, very natural. And until 6 years ago, I always did something else also, so as work. I was never only relying on being an artist. And 6 years ago, I decided that it's definitely time to accept that this is what I am. And for me, engineering and being an artist has a lot of similarities. Because there's a lot of beauty in engineering, there's a lot of artistic freedom in engineering, and there's a lot of technical thinking in the arts. And combining those two things became my topic. Very difficult question. When I wrote this text, this was in the middle of this discussion about what people actually do on stage and how they express themselves. And this was before audiovisual performance became such a dominant theme. And I felt that there is a step downwards in accessibility if everything becomes so virtual. For the audience who doesn't understand anything anymore, but also there's a lack of play space for the performer. And I personally feel that what happens now, that people travel with modular synthesizers and more hardware again, shows that there is a desire to have physical expression, to use physical instruments and interfaces, because we are physical beings and we like to interact with objects. And it doesn't matter what kind of object it is, but I believe it is important that there's more than just this very narrow field of the screen and the mouse. This is just such a very small tunnel into a larger world. And maybe this is going to change with virtual reality, because suddenly this narrow view to a small screen will be replaced by a 360-degree immersive situation. Who knows? Maybe this will change everything. No.
It's your.
My experience with being with Ableton for such a long time clearly showed me what it means to have a company. And I don't want to make a company out of that. I built it for myself, and it was a lot of work, but I learned a lot, and it helped me doing things on stage which I couldn't do before. So I still think it was a well-invested time. But turning this into a product would be a very different thing, and I don't see the necessity for it. There's so many controllers out there, including Push 2 now, which is fantastic. I think Push 2 is a really, really powerful machine because it gives a different type of access to life, and a different kind of access really means people do different things. It encourages thinking about life in a new way, and I'm very convinced that people will, the more they use it and the more they learn how to treat it as an instrument, the more empowered they will feel. Actually, at the beginning, the idea was to really build a very small and simple synthesizer. It was never meant to be a big instrument. The main concept was to build something that is very quick. And I'm surprised by myself that operators stand the test of time so well that I think 10 years after it came out, it still is an instrument which, for instance, I personally use very often because it does a lot of things I like and it has a lot of hidden details. I think you don't need more than 4 because you can still use racks and you can stack things, and I'd rather have something which is easy to understand than something with more options but more difficult. When I made Operator, FM7, FM8 was out, and this huge modulation matrix made it very powerful, but it also made it really difficult to understand what goes on. And I deliberately decided that Operator needs to be much simpler. In the simpler, there's this relative loop mode, which I found important because my idea was that you can drop any sample in it and it will keep this loop mode, which actually is broken in the latest version. And I hope a lot of people will complain about that, because then it's gonna change. Yeah, I don't remember anymore. The funny thing is, you forget a lot of things, and sometimes I try to remember how we made some decisions back in the days, like 10-15 years ago, and I just can't remember anymore who had which idea when.
It was a fluid and a fluent word.
It was a small group of people and constant discussions, sometimes late at night with a beer, and you only remember the results but not how it got there.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it was actually really nice.
Well, sure.
Also, of course, a lot of arguments. We had lots of fights about details, which, in retrospective, sometimes was really important. That was a little idea to put some basic granular synthesis in there, you know. And it's what I like on the effects in live is that all of them were made with a lot of dedication. So even if they seem to be simple, there a lot of thoughts went into them, and I think you can feel that if you use it. I personally, if I use instruments, I can feel the personality of the people who built them. And the instruments I like are instruments where I probably also, I assume that, would have an interesting discussion with the people who did them. So I met a few of these people. I met, for instance, Roger Lynn. And I found it really interesting to discuss music with him, because his idea of music is ingrained in the Linn drum. So you use this instrument, and you're using a part of the brain of Roger Lynn. That's cute in its good and bad sides, you know.
Yep.
Well, the thing with the quasi-synchronous one is that you always have two grains overlapping, which is a technique which was derived from time domain time stretch, which gives in comparison, very even texture. And for me, this was always the things I was more interested in. I didn't want to have those stochastic clouds of grains. I wanted to have basically a time stretching instrument with lush sounding capabilities. And in the asynchronous version, basically you have statistic random distributions, and it always sounds like rain. And I just didn't find this so useful for my own purposes, because the granulator, I built it for myself, of course. And only later I decided that it's something which needs to go out in the wild.
Yeah.
And it's again something where I'm really happy how many people are using it. I didn't anticipate that.
It's such a brilliant instrument. It's so fun.
Yeah, I know. It's also one of I made a lot of instruments which never got public, you know. So there's a lot of Max for Live devices which are kind of unfinished because at some point I lost interest in them.